Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Living Torah from your living room. So one of the mitzvot of this week's Torah portion is, of course, V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. It's a very small portion, but it contains so many different laws within, many of them actually about interpersonal relationships. And that most famous one, the mitzvah of what we otherwise know as Ahavat Yisrael, loving your fellow as yourself, upon which Rabbi Akiva famously says, and Rashi quotes it, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is a foremost fundamental principle of the Torah. You know, what is the opening of every Jewish conversation? Every Jewish conversation, Shalom Aleichem, Aleichem Shalom. Imagine I meet you and I say, good morning, and you reply, morning good. But isn't that, after all, how Jews function? On the surface, it seems also cordial, but there's something else going on beneath the surface. The moment someone says to you, Shalom Aleichem, your instinctive response is, no, you got it wrong. It's the other way around, Aleichem Shalom. See, the cardinal sin of the very first temple was idolatry. At that time, we endured the destruction of the temple and were subsequently exiled to Babylon for 70 years. It's a serious sin, idolatry. It's a capital crime, no less. But when committing idolatry, you are offending God. And to be frank, he can get over it. The second temple was destroyed on account of baseless hatred, infighting amongst our own. We have been in exile ever since. Why the distinction? Well, you know, if there's one point that Hasidism in particular can never overemphasize, it is the principle first introduced by the Baal Shem Tov, who said there are three kinds of love: a love for God, a love for Torah, and a love for one's fellow Jew. And they are all inextricably linked. And furthermore, if you have a love for God and you have a love for Torah, but you're lacking in your love for your fellow, then you should know that the professed love for God or the professed love for Torah will ultimately dissipate. The point is that you could be a self-proclaimed righteous religious Jew who prays 3 times a day, learns in depth every day, gives your charity every day, you're punctilious in your observance. And at the same time, you might confess privately that there may be 1 or 2 people who are there that you don't really care that much about, or maybe not at all. Or maybe worse still, that you don't like them altogether. You don't want to talk to them altogether. Newsflash. You might think that notwithstanding your animosity towards another, your relationship with God is intact. But let me ask you a simple question. How would you react if somebody says to you, I love you? Your kids, I can't stand. You know, in my regular column, the issue of intermarriage does tend to come up often enough. And at one point, I tended to stress, and I've reiterated it again many times, that in our relationships, we strive to be soulmates. It's not a cliche, it's what we really are. The problem is when you talk of a Jewish soul that is looking to merge with a non-Jewish soul, then they are religiously, emotionally, spiritually incompatible. And therefore, they can never really, truly be soulmates. There can never be that deeper level of connectiveness. It can never be a real bond. And frankly, that has more often than not raised the ire of many a mixed married couple who will write into the paper airing their grievances. What are you talking about? I'm married to my husband for 37 years and we have a truly loving relationship. And my simple answer is, no, you don't. You might make it work, but something is lacking. You don't know what's lacking because you haven't experienced the other side. You're not living what somebody else might be living with another Jewish soul. So you might think you're experiencing true love based on what you know entirely from your own vantage point. But I can tell you that because the 2 souls are not compatible, something is still ultimately missing. And I suggest the same is true in regard to loving your fellow Jew. In as much as you think life is on an even keel and everything is good because you pray, you do the mitzvot, you do whatever else besides, and even though you may not talk to this one or that one, you perceive everything else in your spiritual life as hunky-dory, it's not. Because frankly, for all the Torah you study and all the mitzvot, the good deeds that you do and all the tzedakah, the charity that you give, if you don't like the child, you are impeding in your relationship with the Father. And you cannot then possibly be experiencing true abundance of blessing, all the real love and spiritual influence the Father would like to shower upon you. So yes, when the first temple was destroyed on account of idolatry, God was offended. It took him a while. 70 years, but he got over it. And however you offend his kids, well, that he doesn't get over, and certainly not when that continues to fester. We have to get over it. We have to get past it. We have to learn to put aside our differences, and then he'll get over it as well, as the stability and peace will be restored once more. Do you know our whole existence as a people is a supernatural existence? In the words of our sages, like a sheep amongst 70 wolves, and great is the shepherd who looks over us and protects us. But what happens when the sheep turns around to the shepherd, who's standing there with his double-barreled shotgun, and says, "Thank you very much, I can take it from here"? Well, then frankly, so be it. You're on your own. At this point, it's up to you to make it. And now the wolves are not so scared, and you are ripe for the picking. If you offend the father by telling him you don't like his kids, he'll tell you, okay, you're on your own. And that is when we are at our most vulnerable. That's been our reality from time immemorial. When there is peace in the ranks, there is stability, strength, and fortitude. And when not, then not. Aaron, the high priest, was famous for keeping the peace. Hillel tells us in the Mishnah and Ethics of the Fathers, be like the children of Aaron, pursue peace. What was his secret? Our rabbis famously tell us that he had a fantastic ploy. He'd go to Mr. Reuben and say to him, I know you are quarreling with Mr. Simon. You ought to know that he really regrets the fallout and he wants to make up with you. And then Aaron would go to Mr. Simon and he would repeat exactly the same thing. He would tell him, you know, Mr. Reuben is really regretting the whole fallout that he has with you, and he'd really like to make up with you. And of course, needless to say, when the two of them would suddenly then interact and pass each other, each one would think and recognize that the other really wants to make up. And so the ice would be broken and harmony would be restored. But the question is asked, doesn't that, however, mean that Aaron, the great high priest, was being economical with the truth? And the answer is this: Aaron may have never spoken to either Mr. Reuben or Mr. Simon, but at the very core of every Jew, we all want to do what's right. At the core of every one of us, like a brother or a sister, we don't want to be separated from one another. We can all relate to that, right? You do something nasty to a friend or a loved one, and later you apologize, I'm so sorry. I honestly don't know what came over me. You know me, this isn't like me at all. I just wasn't being myself. What does it mean you weren't being yourself? It means what we all know to be true, because we all know this about ourselves. We know there is a real self and there is an unreal self. The unreal self may act cruelly, stupidly, or both. The real self would never do anything to hurt a friend or a loved one or anyone else for that matter. So there may be things masking over the core, but Aaron was merely exposing the truth that lies at the essence of every single individual. In other words, in simple terms, you think you don't like that person, but deep down, you're also hurting about it. Deep down, you really do. And Aaron was just looking to expose that deeper truth. There were these two friends who were once walking through the desert when one reached out to the other and slapped him. And the stunned friend didn't say a word, but he immediately wrote in the sand, "Today, my best friend slapped me." And as they walked on, they found an oasis from which they went to quench their thirst. The one friend fell in and started to drown while the other reached for him and managed to save him. And the grateful friend immediately wrote on a stone, "Today, my best friend saved me." And the friend who at first slapped and then saved the other said, "Why did you record my slap in the sand, but my saving you from drowning on stone?" To which the other replied, "When someone hurts you, you know it's just his ugly side rearing itself. It's not really him. Write it down in sand where the winds of forgiveness can erase it away." But when someone does something good for you, that's his true self expressing itself. That is the innate goodness contained within the inner chambers of the pristine soul. Engrave it in stone where nothing can ever erase it. Could you imagine how much more our individual relationships would be enhanced if more of us assumed that mindset? Or picture how much more wonderful communal life would be if everyone took on such an approach. You know, dare I say this, you don't have to go to statistics for this. Anyone who looks into their hearts, honestly enough, knows it to be true. Prejudice is one of the principal constituents of the human personality. You look around everywhere, you're guaranteed to find people harboring prejudices. I don't like him because he's too right-wing. I don't like her because she's too left-wing. I don't like him because he's Litvish. I don't like her because she's Chabad, Sephardic. The nose is too long because of their political views. Take a good look into your own heart, then look at the world around you, what it is, what it could be. Then ask yourself, are you part of the problem and how you can work on being part of the solution? The real problem begins when people take it to extremes. The tendency to turn human judgments into divine commands, as some people do, makes religion one of the most dangerous forces in the world. There are religious Jews who see secular or acting secularly and immediately write them off as not good enough. Or conversely, there are those less religiously inclined who immediately form preconceived ideas and judgments of others who might look or behave different to themselves. We've all seen it on both sides. Haredi, Chiloni, less from, more from, whatever it is. In fact, the very idea that we have these labels, Haredi, Chiloni, from, not from, in and of itself demonstrates how dangerous judgmental religion can be. In fact, we have in the broadest sense, religious and secular, in a more specific sense, Orthodox, conservative, or Masorti, Reform. Even within the so-called Frum world, we have Hasidim and Mitnagdim, and even in the Hasidic world, there's Chabad, and there's Satmar, and there's Babab, and there's Ger, and the list goes on, and it should be stressed loud and clear. We don't believe in labels. Labels are for clothes. There really is no such a thing as Orthodox Jews or Reformed Jews or what have you. All are simply Jews, unqualified in any sense. You could be more observant or less observant, but ultimately a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. There's a very curious story told in the Talmud about a certain Rabbi Elazar who was once traveling along when he passed a rather homely looking individual. And looking at him, Rabbi Elazar remarked, "How ugly is this man?" And the man, upon hearing the insult, turned to the rabbi and said, "Whoa, go to the craftsman who formed me. In other words, you don't like the way I look, take it up with the manufacturer." And Rabbi Elazar felt an immediate sense of remorse and followed the man for miles, begging his forgiveness. What is happening in this story? Is it conceivable that a righteous man like the great Talmudic sage Rabbi Elazar would be so superficial as to judge another based on external appearance? Could you imagine your rabbi coming into shul one day, "Mrs. Silverstein, there's no easy way for me to see this. I'll just come straight out. You need a nose job." I mean, can you ever imagine a rabbi saying that? If the answer is yes, don't answer. But imagine if it was something more of a spiritual challenge. Imagine a rabbi getting up and saying, "How ugly is this person religiously? How devoid or crass is this person spiritually?" Can you imagine a rabbi speaking like that? Maybe not yours, but a rabbi here or there. Maybe not even expressed verbally, but simply by looking down or by nuance and innuendo. Rashi offers two cryptic comments, which I think sheds light on the story. First, he notes that the homely man was really Elijah the prophet in disguise, looking to teach the rabbi a lesson. He also observes that Rabbi Elazar was just returning from study, feeling uplifted. You know that elated feeling generated after enjoying a satisfying study session. So yes, he was surely feeling very satisfied with the amount of time he had just spent learning and the knowledge accumulated. He didn't just reflect on the man's external appearance. He looked beneath the surface and he didn't like what he saw. The man that stood before him was void and null of any spirituality. How ugly is this man? Rabbi Elazar, on account of his newly acquired spiritual contentment engendered from his learning, is quick to condemn this lesser mortal. But the man retorts, "Go to the craftsman who formed me. By definition, I too am a creation of God. I may not be of the same lofty status as you, but the same craftsman who formed you formed me as well. And I have a soul and I'm an extension of God as well." Elijah is looking to teach Rabbi Elazar an important lesson that is equally pertinent to each of us. Maybe there was something of a holier than thou mindset there. Maybe there was an issue whereby Rabbi Elazar looked down upon those whom he felt may not be up to parity with his own spiritual disposition. But this man, or Elijah, retorted with a fundamental Jewish principle: love your fellow as yourself, as per this week's portion. You don't know where he's been. You don't know the DNA makeup of his soul. In the words of the famous book, the Tanya, though at first glance a person might appear to be loathsome and despicable, who can know their true greatness and excellence in their root and source in God? Look beyond the supposed skin-deep ugliness and see the brilliance and the goodness within. Why did God define the mitzvah in this week's portion as having to be as oneself? Tell me I have to love somebody else. Fine, but why stress love somebody else as yourself? And the answer is simple, but very profound. Here's the problem. I'm supposed to love you, which essentially means that I accept you as you are. That's what love means, right? But should I accept you as you are? If I define a fault in you, shouldn't I be doing more to help you? Which essentially means that I don't just accept you as you are. Because I love you, I want to help you and make you better. Love is an oxymoron. To truly love you, I have to do two contradictory things. I have to respect you. I have to respect who you are and I have to accept you as you are with all your faults. And at the same time, I have to care for you, which means always wanting better for you, wanting to see change in you, which means that I don't accept you as you are. I can't do both at the same time. Love sounds very romantic, but it is essentially impossible. But guess what? I love myself. I'm very aware of my shortcomings more so than anybody else. We all strive for improvement. I want to rectify whatever character flaws, but in the meantime, I don't love myself any less. So even as I know that I need improvement, I also accept myself for who I am right now, and I love myself truly, fully, in every sense of the word. By the way, I really do. The fact that such love is a paradox is irrelevant. It may be impossible to do two opposite things at the same time, but billions of healthy, stable people, myself and yourself included, do exactly that. I love myself regardless of the inherent contradiction this love embodies. And so, when our sages tell us, don't judge someone else until you are in their place. So what does it mean to be in their place? Simply put, it means the same circumstances as those of the other individual. But at a deeper level, it says that even if you are in the same set of given circumstances, you don't know the makeup of his or her soul. And unless you are of identical disposition, how can one soul possibly judge another? The point is that we all come into this world with an objective by which we're meant to make our own unique contribution, to make this world a better place, and to elevate our environment around us. And our souls will have certain areas of deliberate vulnerability. And our souls will be vulnerable because it's necessary for that soul to have the capacity to be tempted in a certain area or to have exposure to failure in a certain area. The challenge or test, if you like, is unique to that soul. By the same token, every soul has its unique strengths. Every person will know where he or she is on more solid ground than somebody else, maybe in kindness or integrity or strength or intellectual ability, etc. Every soul has a positive high watermark upon it which it can rely. So our missions in life are not the same. Why is he failing when I'm not failing? Because that's his area of vulnerability, and I'm not vulnerable in that same specific area. Success is only an achievement for the soul with the challenge. There's nothing remarkable about being able to walk, but it is an achievement for somebody who is otherwise a cripple to walk. For somebody who is not crippled to compare their walking to a man on crutches is not only inappropriate, it's foolish. To put it in simple terms, we criticize other people because we make a judgmental decision about that person's inability to function in comparison to our ability to function in that same given situation. How unfair is that? It's like expecting a 6-year-old to lift a suitcase because it's not heavy for me as an adult. So a fundamental problem with people's inability to deal with one another's failings is that they're measuring those failings against their own strengths. And as we said, the only judge can be God himself, because only he knows with what strengths and weaknesses each soul began. And that's why there is the directive of Ahavat Yisrael, defined with V'ahavta l'reacha kamacha. Love your fellow as yourself. You find it impossible to truly love another, to accept them unconditionally on the one hand, while wanting to improve them on the other, which would imply that you don't love them unconditionally. Well, then think for a minute about how you love yourself, and then always ensure to love your fellow as yourself. Said Rabbi Akiva, this is the foremost fundamental principle of the Torah.